an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Dark Lord of Derkholm, chapters 23, 24, and 25, brought to you by Patricia. In these chapters, I don't even know where to start with all of the surprises in this section. I mean, we've got human trafficking and animal trafficking. We've got person trafficking. We have a, plot involving Barnabas, who I never expected to have any sort of initiative of his own. We have Kit being alive and being proven to be alive very shortly. We have, just everything is going to hell so quick. I don't know what to think about any of it. I'm lost. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. You guys, I'm not even kidding. I was blown away by what a left turn this book took. How could I have predicted? We had so much to be going on with in terms of plot already that it never occurred to me that we'd be opening up this whole other avenue. It felt like whatever mystery was going on, whatever, underhanded attempts at undermining Lord Chesney's plans and business Kirita was engaged in was going to slowly be revealed, but we'd know what her motivation was the whole time. There'd be an understandable progression to the way that she handled things. It has not been like that at all. We have the revelation of a whole other plot going on, as well as this fucking fight. I was going to say underground fight club, but it's not underground. It's like a public, a gladiator tour sort of thing. I'm so caught off guard by all of it. I was reading this with my mouth hanging open. So chapter 23, we start off with Blade, who it turns out got trampled by horses because he tried to jump in and help Suki, and he just gets knocked out. So I guess when Shona was looking for him, he was right there and she just didn't see him because he was unconscious probably. And when Revel finally finds him, Revel is genuinely in love with Suki, which Blade can't understand. And he thinks Suki is, I keep going between calling her Suki and Suki. He thinks that Suki is so insufferable that there's no way that Revel could really be in love with her. It has to be that she is tricking him somehow, because he just thinks that she's so odious that nobody would like her for who she is. So this must be some sort of ploy. But we find out later that no, they're genuinely really into each other. And Blade starts to understand the attraction between the two of them because they're both really nervy people. They're just willing to do risky things and willing to go in for adventure without really thinking it through. Seems like a mean way to say it, but at least without overthinking it at the risk of downplaying it too much. And it's just a really interesting series of moments with them in this first chapter trying to catch up with her, and Revel and Blade translocating and following, and the soldiers whom it apparently they had captured her. And I was just as concerned as Blade was initially, not only because of what happened to Shona and not wanting that to happen to any woman, whether that woman be Suki or not, but also not really wanting to read about that happening to another woman. And it weirdly doesn't go down that road at all, which makes me wonder why they tried to capture her in the first place. and why they sort of treated her, I don't want to say with respect, but in comparison to Shona, yeah, with respect. And I'm like, is Suki like related to Chesney or something? Like, were they told to go and scoop her up from this place because she wasn't supposed to be part of the tour, and she was like being removed from this world because she was like sort of unauthorized? I feel like that's what it is, but it's just so sloppily done. And if that were it, you'd think that he would have like sent a wizard, a magic user, to come and like scoop her up and then translocate to wherever they want to go. But these are just soldiers that are like plodding over the earth in there with their horses and carrying supplies and doing this in a really ordinary sort of human way. And following her is like really tough because they have to keep her in sight, but they have to stay far back enough that the soldiers don't see them. They didn't bring any provisions, so they also have to like try and pilfer things from the camp. Eventually, the horses that got recalled by the horse lady, it makes all of the soldiers really suspicious because they think that somebody swooped in and stole their horses in the middle of the night. And so they become even more guarded with her than they had been. And when the horses get recalled, in this section, it's not like it is in the other where, you know, Dirk comes around and all the horses are gone. This one, the horses, we actually see them like running away, and they trample Revel this time. So poor Blade is in a really bad way initially because he's covered with bruises from very nearly being killed by being trampled to death. And Revel's sort of like giving him a hard time about being a bit of a baby about it. And then Revel gets a taste of his own medicine, and it's just like, oh, never mind. This is really awful. And there's this moment that I really quite liked, actually. They try that, let's see. The evening of the third day, Blade pointed out that amazing as it was, no one had tried to hurt Suki yet, and the two of them were not going to be much use to her as they were. He explained that they could catch up with the soldiers, even carrying Revel along, from anywhere up to 50 miles away, and he suggested that they have a day's rest. Revel did not agree. He and Blade had a nasty argument. It only ended when Blade burst into tears, tore his beard off, and threw it at Revel. "Oh," said Revel, staring at him, "I was forgetting you're only young. And I tell you, it wouldn't take much to make me cry, too. All right, a day's rest. We move and when we're fresh." That was the evening the horse lady called in all the horses. This time it was Revel who got trampled. After a long pause, he added, I don't think I was sympathetic enough when this happened to you." "Look on the bright side," Blade said. "The kidnappers are walking now." Unfortunately, Suki's captors seemed to have decided that someone had stolen their horses. For the next few days, they were so watchful that Revel did not dare limp too near them. They sprang up at the least noise and stabbed their swords into bushes. And they guarded Suki as if she were the most valuable thing in the world. If they had not been forced to abandon quite a heap of provisions when the horses left, Blade and Revel would have been starved as they hobbled along behind. As it was, they had more stale bread than they could carry. So they follow her along for a while, and then they do this thing where Revel lets Blade know that he is also a magic user and that he can learn to translocate if given some time. So they work on practicing together, and there's this whole sort of montage of him training and finally getting to a point where he can do this adequately. And they decide that they're going to translocate into the camp, grab Suki, and then translocate out again. But when they translocate out again, Revel isn't good enough at it, and they haven't coordinated exactly where they're going to head to get out. So it takes pretty much all of Blade's strength to keep them on course and not have them accidentally translocate back into the camp after they have seemed to get away. And this leaves him drained once they actually land somewhere so that he can't translocate away again. And two of the men that they're watching, two of the soldiers, Blade felt he had known these two men for a long time. He had first seen both of them when he and his family had helped Barnabas get the newly arrived army to the camp near Derkholm. He had pushed past them on Nancy Cobber and noticed that they seemed less drugged than the rest. Meanwhile, Revel was plucking at Blade's sleeve in an alarmed way. "We're running out of time. As soon as they get to their hideout, we have no chance." So this is interesting. It's the first clue that like something is going on with Barnabas. And, you know, we assumed that something was going on with Barnabas last chapter when all of the enchantments seemed to have something wrong with them, but Dirk couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. But this is the first time that it feels like something that doesn't have anything to do with Querido's plot, because I assumed whatever Barnabas was doing was on Querida's say-so. I assumed that it was all part of the same, like, conspiracy. And as it turns out, he's doing some shit that she would not be okay with and is a downright bad person. He is evil. He is enslaving people. He is very willing to kill Blade, whom Blade looked at him as an uncle figure his whole life and thought of him as a friend. And now it turns out this guy is not going to bat an eyelash at Blade being killed, and already had intended for Kit to have been killed. Like, the whole thing is just so... Barnabas being the crux of this whole thing, or not this whole thing, because that makes it sound like the entire plot of the book, and that's not fair. But the Barnabas being involved in his own plot that has nothing to do with anybody else's agenda is 100% unexpected. I just never gave him that kind of credit because he just seemed like a drunken idiot. And I can't help but wonder what the hell was going on with him when he was at Dirk's camp before, and he was a drunken idiot and had like fucked up so much. What was that about? Was he actually drunk? Was he play acting for some reason in order to distract everyone? Was he trying to like undermine things by not getting them done in time and using being drunk as his excuse to cover for what he was really doing? I don't know where to start with wondering what the hell's going on here. So they grab Suki. They translocate a million different places by accident before they finally stop somewhere, and it turns out that they're like in a lake. Luckily, they're near the shore, so they're not drowning or anything. But they get out of the lake, and there's a person sitting there fishing. The man fishing turned round with an inquiring smile. He was wearing huge wading boots and clothes the color of the hills surrounding them. He seemed young and good-natured. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Can I help?" "We're a bit lost," Blade explained. "Can you tell us the best way to go?" "The nearest big place is Costa Merit," the fisherman said. "It's more than 100 miles southeast of here." "Oh," said Blade. He thought about translocating there and realized just by thinking about it that his ability to translocate had been completely drained for the moment by the mad zigzag struggle with Revel. "Is there anywhere nearer than that?" The fisherman shifted his rod carefully into his left hand and pointed with his right at the khaki saddle of hill above them. "Up there, you'll find somewhere on the other side of that." He smiled, obviously feeling for the dismay on Blade's face. "It's the only way, really. I'm sorry." Blade looked up along his pointing hand. It was not so far to that lower part of the hill, though it looked steep. He looked back at the fisherman. He was not there. There was not even a ripple in the water or a footprint from his waders. Whoever the man was, he was clearly a very powerful magic user. Blade had not even felt the power it must have taken to vanish like that. Meanwhile, Revel was towing Suki along the lake shore to the spit. Both of them were pink and happy and full of energy. I don't know what to make of that. Somebody just pops up, gives him advice, disappears without leaving so much as a trace, and then they wind up getting captured, but they discover the conspiracy. So I'm like, were they trying to get them captured? Was this person like setting them up to be captured? Or was this person trying, like, somehow put here to push Blade to discover what's really happening? Or neither. But they, like, I feel like that was a god. How's that? That was a god, wasn't it? That was somebody. All right, let's go with that. Patricia's in the chat and she just put a smiley face. That's her only comment so far. It's just that one smiley face. It's very expressive. So they wind up climbing up this mountainside, and it's like covered in that grass that's really, really slippery. I don't know if you guys have come across this, but I have, and it is such a weird sensation to slide on grass like that. But they have to like get down on their stomachs kind of to like wiggle up, and it turns out to be a really good thing that they did, because once they get to the top, there are people there that are not going to be happy to see them, and they're luckily on their stomachs and out of like sight. And there are 10 men who have armor on. These men had nasty-looking whips with which they were threatening 3 groups of ragged, skinny people who were bowed down and straining to push 3 large covered metal trucks along 3 lengths of metal rails. Each set of rails came out of one of 3 more messy holes in the mountain, then ran for 100 yards before it just stopped. Blade puzzled about this. He also puzzled about why the struggling people did not just turn on the men with whips until he saw they were chained. As he saw the chains, the puzzle about the rails was solved too. Each truck had now struggled its way to the very end of the rails and stopped. A cheerful figure in a billowing robe sauntered up to stand level with them, ran a hand through his gray curls, and then made the sort of weary practice gesture that Blade knew rather well. 3 curious slits appeared in front of each truck. They seemed to be slits in the very nature of things, because they ran through the moors, mountains, and the road, and yet seemed to float on top of the landscape at the same time. The slits writhed about a bit, settled, and became openings into somewhere else. Blade peered, but all he could see beyond the openings were more metal rails continuing the ones the trucks were on. The men in old soldier armor shouted and cracked the whips. The bowed people in chains heaved, and the trucks ran through into somewhere else. The openings vanished, and the overseers urged the prisoners back to the mountain again, where if Blade craned, he could see 3 more trucks waiting. So, what it turns out to be, this is so strange. Because, of course, at first I'm thinking that this is related to the dwarfs bringing gold. And this is a mine, and so, of course, I'm assuming that they're mining something precious. Metal, gems, who knows. But as it turns out, the very earth of this place contains magic. And all that's in those little hand trucks is dirt. Because it serves as a sort of energy source in our world. And I say our world with some hesitance because, we don't know for sure that wherever Chesney comes from is our world, but it's safe to assume, I think, that is implied here. So this dirt is being sent through to be used as an energy resource but it's not infinite. It does eventually run out and they have to replenish it. And Barnabas is the one running everything, and Barnabas is getting paid for it. I can't believe this. This is so crazy. And when they go into the mountain to investigate further and actually find this out, they run into the demon. Me, agreed the demon. I said we would meet again. Why are you here? Have you come to steal demon food like the other humans? They dig it out of the mountain, and they take it out of the world, and they set the place around with wards and demon traps. Take just 1 ward off for me. I will make you rich. I'm afraid I don't know how to, Blade said. Or I could kill you if you don't, the demon suggested. But that wouldn't help you, Blade answered through clenched teeth. Then what reward would persuade you? Let me see. Blade felt it pressing all over his mind, sickeningly. He could not think of any way to stop it. He just had to stand there, shaking all over until the demon seemed to have finished. Then he felt its laughter pulsing through him. He wants Deucalion to teach him magic. I could arrange that. But the White Oracle said Deucalion would teach me anyway, Blade thought. That was a comforting thought until Blade realized the Oracle had not said how it would be arranged. Sweat came popping out all over Blade at the idea that Deucalion actually might be a demon. He opened his mouth to protest again that he had no idea how to take the demon wards off, and he realized the demon had gone. Strange. So the demon food, I think, is the magic, right? Like they're taking the magic out of the place. It's just so fucking strange, man. So let's see, some kind of ore, and then he gets the blast of magic and he realizes, so demons eat magic? They must do. I see them, intruders in shaft 20 up there in the arch. And they run and somehow get separated. Revel and Suki manage to get away, but Blade gets captured. And this is when he finds out that it's Barnabas. "You can't be allowed to leave, you know," he said in his usual jolly way. "Sorry about this, but this is a highly secret operation, Blade. It beats me how you ever got inside the secrecy spells over this area. They were some of my best." "I don't understand," he panted. "What are you doing here?" "Mr. Chesney had to have an agent this side, and he chose me. Or did you mean the earth mining?" "That," gasped Blade. "Just earth? I mean, it's full of magic," Barnabas said. "Everything in this world is. But it doesn't endure very long in the world it goes to. It does marvels while it does last, of course. I believe they market it as the new superfuel and use it to run all of their machines, but they have to keep getting more." "Don't they pay for it at all?" "Why should they? It's just Earth," Barnabas said. "They pay me and the overseers rather well for our help, naturally, but who else would they pay?" "Then why do you keep it secret?" "Patriotic people like Kurita or your father would be bound to object," said Barnabas. "I suppose there may even come a time when this world gets short of magic, but that won't be in our time. It won't be for hundreds of years. Meanwhile, you wouldn't deny Mr. Chesney and his world all the obvious benefits of massive amounts of cheap power, would you?" And just as Blade is starting to be like, he's just telling me everything with no qualms at all, he realizes that there's somebody behind him, and they basically chloroform him. And that's the end of the chapter. And I was like, what in the fuck is going on? So let's go to chapter 24 with Dirk getting home. So Dirk doesn't even bother, because I had been theorizing like all of the different things that Dirk could do when he gets home and how he could handle this situation. And the main thing that I had thought was that Dirk was going to take all of the like Dark Lord illusions off of his home and put things as close to back to normal as possible. That is not what happens. He stops some things and he puts up a barrier so that none of the pilgrims are able to get to his place, but he doesn't actually, have the energy to completely undo everything that's been done. So he winds up, I'm trying to think exactly how that, because he had been tempted to put a barrier around the entire place so that nobody could get in. And he finally leaves it open right at the back gate so that at least like Shona and Colette, or Lyda, sorry, Colette's back already, are able to get in. But other than that, Dirk builds like a little hut on the terrace and hangs out in there with the pigs and just doesn't eat hardly at all and doesn't move hardly at all. And whenever anybody comes to him with information about what's going on, he just yells at them to go away. He is so consumed with grief at not only losing Kit, but we see later, like losing Mara. He thinks that everything with his wife is over. That apparently he still thinks that she's having an affair and is kind of cutting her out mentally as well. And it's just a really sad little, like, I'm not sure exactly how long is supposed to pass before Kurita turns up. But Colette says something, because he has hardly been moved the entire time that he's been home. The one thing that gets him to like shift himself is hearing that Colette is home and that she's not eating because she's still growing and eating is very important for her. So he gets up to go talk to her and she says to him, "I'm not sorry Kit's dead and I know I ought to be, so I'm staying here until I am sorry." which was a really surprising thing to say. "I'm sorry enough for two," Dirk said. "Won't that do?" "Go away," said Colette. Taste of my own medicine, Dirk thought, and went back to his hut on the terrace. Carita came the next day. To a wizard of her powers, Dirk's defenses were not exactly child's play. They nearly defeated her. Possible to overcome with a severe struggle. She arrived on the terrace, leaning heavily on the stick she now used instead of crutches, and not quite so calm and strong as she would have wished. Good gracious gods, she thought. The smell of pig and person from the hut was appalling. Behind it, the house was almost as bad. Since Dirk had stopped caring about the citadel magics, parts of it had frayed or fallen off. The house was now a patchwork of dark archways and black half-towers mixed in with ordinary windows and walls. Barnabas's transparent repaired part shone out above the sinister black carvings around the citadel's door. But the door was open, showing an indescribable mess inside. Horse droppings, chewed bones, and dwarves that came and went. More and more dwarfs as they realized that someone new had arrived. Carita did not blame the big golden griffin sitting protectively beside the hut for looking so unhappy. So she tries to talk some sense into him, and I say sense with quotes around it, because Dirk is acting very sensibly for somebody who just lost a child in a lot of ways. But Carita is still concerned about the pilgrim tours, which really surprised me because, of course, I'm assuming this is exactly what she wanted. I'm still under this idea that Kit was meant to either die or look like he had died in order to get Dirk to stop doing what he's supposed to be doing. Oh yeah, Patricia says, well, too, because Blade is still missing. Yeah, I forgot about that. So that also. So yeah, I was really surprised when she's like, you know that you need to open this back up again so that the pilgrims can get home. And he's basically like, I really don't give a shit. That's super duper not my problem. And she's like, but it is though. It is your problem. And all the dragons have vanished, said Carita. They're angry, said Dirk, about the gold. Dragons sit on gold because they get vital vitamins from it. They haven't been allowed enough gold for years. Oh, said Carita. I wasn't aware of that. Which is really interesting and a nice little bit of lore that I think feels really true and cool. So finally, there's hardly a single tour event anywhere that hasn't broken down in some way. They depend on the Dark Lord to keep them organized. I know, said Dirk. Carita hissed with annoyance. It was true she had meant the tours to break down. She'd done a great deal of work to make sure they did. But not like this, with more than half the pilgrim party stranded here. Wizard Dirk, she began. Something heavy shuffled behind her on the terrace. Leave him alone, said Colette. I found out I am sorry about Kit after all. Carita went on gaping. It began to dawn on her that she was intruding on real grief here. So am I, Colette, said Dirk. So am I. I've got no one to fight anymore, Colette explained. And then this hole opens up, and Mr. Addis pops through. Good morning. There seem to have been one or two hiccups in our choreography. I'm here to sort things out. Just go away, Dirk said wearily. Mr. Addis stared down at him and straightened his tie again. For a start, he said, Mr. Dirk, you were required to manifest as a dark shadow, not as an extra pig. This simply will not do as the citadel. The illusion is not convincing. And there seems to be some mix-up over the tribute as well. Mr. Dirk, Mr. Chesney is already seriously displeased, and this will displease him further. We're talking extensive fines here, Mr. Dirk. Why have only 1/3 of our pilgrim parties returned home? And then he goes on and on about how Dirk is under contract, that the severity of all of the punishments is going to be even worse. And he says that the remaining parties add up to 1,600 people. And so if they don't come home, that's that's an enormous loss, and not all of those people are expendable. Finally, Dirk stood up. Mr. Addis backed from the filthy, unshaven mess that Dirk was. Loss? I've lost my wife and my son. I saw the griffin who was a son to me shot down by your soldiers. My human daughter and my griffin daughter are missing, and you talk to me of 1,600 tourists who aren't even dead. I think Mr. Chesney's interests are best served, Mr. Addis began. And Colette loses her temper and basically chases him back through his portal because she is about to eat him. She is so fucking irritated. And she hasn't eaten in days, so she's like really lost some weight. But when she chases this guy, she realizes that actually, I wasn't lying. I am hungry. And gets one of the dwarfs to bring her like a roast. Kirita watched. She watched Dawn crawl unhappily up to Dirk, and Dirk realized that Dawn was feeling as bad as Colette. She watched him spare an arm from Colette to wrap around Dawn. Kirita watched a hurried group of dwarfs bringing what looked like half a roast cow on a huge platter out onto the terrace. She watched Colette's beak swing eagerly toward it. Kirita murmured to herself, I must see Mara. I made a mistake there. She rapped her stick sharply on the paving stones and vanished. So yeah, I wonder what Kirita is going to change up her plan. Because I think that she thought Mara being away would just distract Dirk. I don't think she realized that that was going to be like such a major loss to him that it would serve to completely undermine like his happiness and willingness to continue living, which is definitely part of what's going on here. But that's the end of that chapter, and I don't get that answer yet. So last chapter, 25, where things continue to be baffling. Blade woke up from the unpleasant blank sleep caused by the smelly stuff, feeling ill. He rolled on his face and discovered that the hand he was trying to pillow his cheek on had a thick iron cuff on its wrist attached to a cold length of chain. There was iron underneath him, rumbling and juddering with what seemed to be impossibly speedy movement. This made him feel so much iller that it was a while before he could move his eyes around to see where he was. So disorienting to read, that whole thing. That, like, not only is he chained up somewhere, but he's moving. And apparently alone, at least, like, for the immediate moment. And the whole thing is like a series of moments of him wondering what's happening to him and then deciding very purposefully to not think about it because nothing that he thinks of is good news. So there really just does come a point where you're just like, well, why think about it at all then? This cage was roped to the bed of a cart and being towed very fast down a sunken road by the horseless carriage Barnabas had made for Mr. Chesney. To make quite sure that Blade could not translocate out of this mess, his wrist had been chained to the iron cuff. As to where he was being towed, Blade preferred not to think. You got to hear of places where... No. Blade shut his mind and just lived. So yeah, you got to hear of places where... And I'm just like, I've been thinking about this whole Fantasyland as a pretty reasonably civilized place. And you know what? Considering that civilization has often included slavery and fights to the death of enslaved peoples, I guess it is a civilized place in so much as civilization means anything. So yeah. Also, what's going on here, which is so weird. I can't keep track of all of the weird things this section, you guys. But also... Blade's going through a very quantifiable growth spurt. He is growing at a rate that makes the cage uncomfortable after a moment because he is getting too big for it. In real time, able to feel the difference between the positions that he sits in and stands in and lays in because he's growing that fast, which is so bizarre. What a weird thing. Blade tossed and shifted and still found his head and toes jammed ever tighter against the bars. He began to fear he would end up bigger than Kit. Well, at least I'd burst the bars open, he thought, and tried not to panic. I'm like, yeah, would you burst the bars open, or would you just be crushed to death inside a cage? Like, you know, I don't know that your bones are tougher than iron bars, my guy. And there's an argument happening between Barnabas and the guy who's sort of running things. I told you, said Barnabas's voice, sounding breathy and frightened, I need this cargo delivered to Costa Merit tonight. Well, it's not going to be, said another man. The first man, like somebody explaining to an infant, this wizard glow of yours doesn't light up the road enough. Not a rough road like this, going so fast and towing. You want to risk a spill? Break all our necks? So we wait out the night here and go on in the morning, said the second man. I could use some sleep. I want a guard on the cargo then, said Barnabas. One of you sleep in the trailer. Cargo, thought Blade. That's me. It was not good to know that someone who had been like an uncle to you all your life could talk of you as cargo and mean it. Costa Merit was even less good to think of. It was one of those places, no. Again, I was just like, what do you mean? One of those places what? What does that mean? So Blade reaches through to try and touch the lock and bolt that are keeping him shackled, and he gets shocked by like an electrical shock. So that's not going to work out. And he's in the middle of just like laying there in a complete hopeless daze, just like, I don't know what to do then, when Lyta shows up. And I was just like, you know, I didn't know what to think about what was going on with Lyta. And it turns out that, like, we find out later that she's, like, figuring out how to do it for herself and really, like, out here surviving and having a good time. But for now, she is trying to help Blade get out of here. And she also handles magic. So Blade is trying to see if she can maybe touch it without getting the shock like he did. Maybe if she has a different kind of magic, or if she does it, you know. But she's in the middle of messing with it and feels the spell starting to yield. And then Barnabas explodes out of the carriage, shouting in sheets of wizard fire. Lyta screamed. Her wings whooped and whooped again. Then she was gone, but whether she was safe or badly burned, Blade had no idea. He touched the roof of the cage and his fingers fizzled. He snatched them away. Oh, damn, poor Lyta. Poorer me. So Barnabas didn't see what it is. He said he thinks that it's like a small dragon. And he was attracted to her because he felt the lock spell being messed with, which is really interesting. Like, I'm not sure how often that happens, but it reminds me, my boyfriend has been playing this multiplayer game that's based on the Jason movies. And part of the game, it's one person is playing Jason, and all of these other players are the various, what do you call it? Camp counselors. And you have to figure out a way to either escape, call the police, or kill Jason. And when you call the police, what you have to do is like fix the phone line. Or if you escape, you need to find gasoline and like fix the car and pour the gas in. And every time that you get near the phone or get near the car, a little like alarm goes off for whoever's playing Jason and alerts them that you are near an area where somebody can make an escape or call cops and do something that will potentially ruin your chance to kill everybody, because you get points if you kill every single camp counselor. And this just really reminded me of that, this like little alert that goes off to let you know that somebody's trying to fuck your shit up. And I don't know if that's something that I remember Blade or Dirk commenting on, that they like, I don't feel like either of them have mentioned being able to tell from afar that somebody was messing with a spell that they put on something. But I find that really interesting. It might just be an additional spell that he put on it, you know, like So that's not something that's standard for spells, but that since it's part of like a security measure, he made sure to add something that alerts him if somebody messes with it. At dawn, the vehicles started off again. The men were complaining they were hungry and saying they could get breakfast in Costa Moret. Barnabas said, "You could have been back in the mine by now," as he checked to see if Blade was still crouched inside the cage. He did not speak to Blade. Just cargo, Blade thought. So they finally get out through this area where there are houses outside, that there are, they're out in open air. The vehicle surged into a huge, chilly shed where a crane of some kind swung the cage off the cart and clanged it down on a stone floor. "So he can't translocate," Blade heard Barnabas saying breathily not far away, "and I want this one dead as soon as possible. Understood?" "Perfectly, Lord Wizard," someone answered oilily. I like that word, oilily. "We have the very thing." Barnabas left then. I was just like, are you serious? I want this one dead? Like, I felt that he didn't... Like, just the fact that he's willing to kill Blade after all this, I still wasn't ready for that, you know? They supported him expertly and rushed him to a small cubicle with a high bed in it, where one of them snapped the end of the chain into a fastening on the wall, and they left Blade alone there. But not for long enough. Blade was still trying to get either his hand out of the cuff or the chain out of its lock when he was interrupted by another cheerful man in a loincloth. This one was twice the size of the first two. "Oh, no, you won't get loose like that," this one told him jovially. "Stop wasting your breath, boyo, and turn over on your front." "Why?" Blade asked suspiciously. "Because I've got to massage you to get you combat fit. You go in the arena this afternoon. This is Costa Moret here, where we love to watch a proper fight, and we love the pilgrim parties for bringing us the idea. Of course, we've improved on it. Got contests you'd never dream of. You're booked for one of those. So lie flat, boyo, because I've only got 4 hours, and by the look of you, I'm going to need every minute." So, like, my surprise cannot be overstated that fucking Blade is about to be put in an arena to fight something. It turns like first there's this whole thing where Blade is being massaged. Blade could feel every single one of his muscles being made to work without using any energy. A bit later, it was punishing. Then it got pleasant again. But the worst part was the way the man talked. Which basically boils down to him being like, if you kill 50 of your opponents, then you get out free. But they keep changing that, and you probably won't. And then starting your growth spurt, aren't you? Lucky we got you at this stage. Much more impressive if you're small in front of someone big. Much better show. Do well at it, and we put a plaque up on your grave. There, now you get a good meal. It's up to you whether you eat it or not, but I advise you to try. More strength, better show. So he falls asleep, and then later gets woken up and brought out to this arena. And another man came up with a list. "You're down as expendable. You don't get a weapon, but you're allowed to use the chain. And remember, you'll fight or you'll get a squirt of the fire hose. Ready?" I should point out here that, you know, in the usual parlance of Earth, a fire hose is a hose used to put out fires. That is not what it means here. This is a hose that shoots fire. So when he says you get a squirt of the fire hose, I was like, that doesn't sound that bad. I'm surprised that that's something so tame. And then I find out later, because Kit shows up, surprise, and is burned, that's what that means. And I was like, oh, that changes the stakes a tiny bit. So he goes out there, and here comes a huge black griffin, and I immediately was like, are you kidding me? Is this Kit? I thought Blade would recognize Kit immediately, but it turns out that Kit just looks like such shit that Blade didn't realize it was him at first. And they decide to pretend that they're fighting each other. We find out later that Kit had like 4 or 5 fights before this and had to kill like a couple of lions and some people. And I really feel for Kit. Like, that sucks, man, to have to live with that and you're not given a choice in the matter. Like, he could let himself die, but why would you do that? Like, what are you accomplishing? Then they have to live with having killed somebody, you know? Like, the whole thing is just so shitty and awful. And so they decide to put on this big show, play fighting the way that they used to do together, that apparently made their mother very, very anxious. And they are in the middle of deciding how they're going to handle this because they realize that they can only postpone actually really hurting each other for so long before the crowd starts to get impatient. And Blade is like, listen, if you have to bite my hand off in order to get this cuff off me, then that's what you need to do. And then we can translocate out of here. And they're in the middle of like deciding, all right, this is what we're going to do, when a shadow falls and Kit thinks this means like that there are clouds coming in. It's going to rain. But it turns out that, and this was what when it had certainly gone very dark, the crowd was bawling and screaming, and the men with hoses were for some reason pointing their streams of fire up into the air. I was like, yeah, it feels like there's a dragon here maybe. And sure enough, here comes Scales. Can't you fly, catbird? No, sir, Kit shrieked. Broken wing. And I can't land. Place too small. What's wrong with the boy? Iron, bellowed Kit. Stops his magic. Stupid little beasts. Get beside him and keep still then. Meanwhile, the Scales has like blown fire down into things and has blown up a bunch of like barrels and fire hoses and stuff and probably killed some people as well, but we won't think about that. And Scales dives and scoops the two of them up in his talons and then flies away. And it was just the most like, it was such a relief because I just didn't know how they were going to get out of this. And Scales is so much fun. Stupid. One of them can't heal himself. The other one can't do iron spells. Any hatchling dragon would be better off than that. Blade and Kit both squirmed. Nobody taught me iron spells, Blade called out. Even if I did know how to heal myself, it wouldn't have helped, Kit bellowed. They clipped my wings. Quiet, Scales grunted. Go find the place. Oh, there she is. So they land, and there is Colette. Bless her heart. When she got burned by Barnabas, she ran off to find Scales and get him to help everything out. Thank you. It's not Colette. It's Lyda. Thank you. I always get the names mixed up. So Lyda has just like come into herself so much since she's been gone. And it's so funny. First of all, she tells Scales that she loves him. Thank you, Scales. I love you. She looked tiny beside him. My pleasure, grunted Scales. I like you too. He had a preening sort of arch to his neck, as if he meant it. Lyda laughed, leaped down from her boulder, and bounded to meet Kit and Blade. They did the griffin dance none of them had done since they were small, circling and jumping, wings spread, arms waving, all of them laughing their heads off until Blade ran out of breath and left the other two still at it. Lyda looked small to him, even now. This was a new Lyda, he realized, slender and sleek and bright-eyed, with a deadly look to her talons and an even more deadly look of power to the glistening sweep of her long, bent-up golden wings. She was batting Kit joyfully on the beak with them, but they still looked deadly. Hey, doesn't she look tremendous? He said to Scales. Good hunter, too, Scales agreed. I met her out hunting yesterday. That's how she knew where I was after she'd trailed you down to that sand pit. How did you get into that mess? Barnabas. He's being paid by Mr. Chesney to mine for magic. As he said Mr. Chesney's name, Scales once again went lizard still. But I don't get how Kit got there, Blade said. So this is when Kit, first of all, Scales shows Kit how to regrow feathers. I could mend that, but I don't grow feathers. But, said Kit, I can't. They won't. Stupid, growled Scales. Like this. Blade was not sure what Scales did. Kit stood for a moment with his head bent, and then looked up at Scales in a startled way. Is that all? That's all, unless you want to grow scales, spines, and spikes as well, Scales answered. Sit down while you're growing them and explain how you got into that sand pit. All this prancing about is making me hungry. So, And also Scales has apparently healed the huge cut that was across Blade's front, because Kit, they were like messing around with each other trying to pretend fight. But at one point, Blade jostles poor Kit's like busted wing and really hurts him. And so Kit lashes out at him and actually like gives him a really good slice across the belly. So apparently when they were being held by Scales, he was healing that shit up. And Kit says it was the geese. And talk about the last thing that I ever expected. What? Said the other three. After the soldiers shot me and I fell in the lake, I lay in the mud at the bottom and I thought I was dead. Then a goose dived down beside me and dragged the arrows out with its beak. And then I realized that I was holding my breath and I thought I'd better come up for some air. So I shoved up and floundered and gasped at the surface. By that time, the whole flock of geese was around me, pushing and pecking and getting my blood on their feathers. I tried to get away. I mean, I can't swim, but they kept pecking until I arrived at the shore. There was a man there telling them what to do, but they couldn't get me out of the water, whatever he told them. The man pulled me out in the end by my beak. Then he told me he was very sorry, but he thought I really had to learn that killing people wasn't a game, and he went away with the geese and left me lying there. It was odd. I wasn't bleeding anymore, but my wing was broken and I felt awful. And after a bit, the hunters from Costa Moret came with a cart. They'd been hunting lions for the arena, but they didn't mind catching me instead. They tangled me in a net and cut my wing feathers. Then they heaved me onto the cart and brought me along to Costa Moret. So, again, is that the god? I really had to learn that killing people wasn't a game. He pulled me out by my beak. It feels like that's got to be a god, right? What's going on here? This is so weird. You were the fourth person I had to fight. What do you think happened to the others? It's horribly easy to kill a human. Lions are much more difficult. I had 6 lions, but lions and people were just the same. They all wanted to stay alive. So did I, at first. That was the awful part, them or me. And I had no more right than they did to be alive. I just had a beak and talons, and they didn't. Yes, well, no need to go morbid, Scales interrupted. Dragons have that problem, too. I just felt so bad for Kit. Like, that sucks, man. Lions and people, like, I just feel for him. That's a lot. So, okay, then we go to this fucking other, what is her name? This mauve dragon that everybody just didn't really like very much. She comes up and she has 2 owls that are carrying messages. They're both from Mara. Blade says, Blade, darling, for goodness sake, try to get to Derkholm as soon as you can. Your father needs you badly. I'll meet you there and explain. Lyda's message said the same, except hers began, Lyda, my love, I'm afraid your holiday's over. And also, this dragon has brought clothing for Blade to change into. Dragons, it seemed, did not need to speak in order to exchange news. Scales rumbled, Let's get going if you're up to flying, Catbird. She says we have to get to Derkholm. I don't know what's going to happen. What even's going to happen? I want Barnabas to be strung up. Fuck that guy. Also, who are the people that he has enslaved? Are those like fucking pilgrims? Are those people that Chesney has given him to mine the place? Like, I feel like those aren't members of their world, that they're probably members of Chesney's world, that he's been like, you know, maybe there's been people that are marked as expendable that he's wound up doing this with instead of outright killing them. But there have been like whole towns of people disappearing. So what do I know? Like, I don't feel like Barnabas would be that unsubtle with who he takes for his slave labor, that it would be entire towns of people. I don't think that's it. But there's really no telling where these emaciated folks are from. I mean, at the very least, we know that the soldiers that are in charge are from Chesney's world. And how long has this been going on? And how much is Barnabas getting paid for it? And where the fuck is he now? Did he just go back to the mines? He probably did, right? Because he just assumes that Blade's taken care of. He doesn't know. So there's no reason for him to like go into hiding or, do anything to sort of protect himself. Yeah, wow. Slave labor and gladiator battles and a whole secret, just the number of things that Chesney has set up to exploit this place would almost be impressive if it wasn't so terrible. Like how many methods. He's got tourism. He's got the dwarves that are bringing him tributes of gold. He's got the fees that he like lays on all of the people from this world if they do things wrong. Then he's got the energy coming in that I imagine he's probably selling for a good amount. What else is out there that he's, Jesus Christ. Yeah, so this should, this opens so many more possibilities for other directions that this book could go in that I don't know where to start in theorizing about what could happen next. Like, I imagine that what we're getting to is Mara going back to Derkholm and trying to convince Dirk that Karita like told her to stay away from him and that she still loves him and stuff. But I don't know that he'll believe her. At least Kit coming back and Blade also being with Kit, like he gets them back, so that's going to restore a lot of his happiness. But what does that do in order to further the cause of getting Chesney out of this universe? Like what exactly are they? Is that going to be of concern to him anymore? Is he going to stage like a rebellion? Basically an outright one instead of this sort of like softcore one that we've been having. Yeah, I don't know. There are a lot of possibilities and a lot of different reactions that he could have to this. If they just outed Barnabas as well, what does that do? Are people going to, are there other people involved other than Barnabas? First of all, it looks like he's the only one from this world that's involved with that part of things and that nobody else has any idea. So he's just one person from that side against the whole rest of everyone who lives there. So I'm guessing, it's not going to be too hard to bring him down. But I don't know what other infrastructure's in place and how that would all go. I just want to see Chesney just like fucking brought low, man. That's what I want, really. So yeah, I guess that's about it for this section. Thank you again to Patricia for commissioning this episode. This is such a weird, wild book. I've been really enjoying it. And I hope you all have been enjoying my coverage. And I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.